If I'm looking to start my career, how do I figure out what on earth it is that I want to do? So the purpose of this video, hopefully, is to run through two approaches that will help you figure out what career is right for you. But first of all, before we get into any of that, the one thing that I am going to talk about is something that's quite a common misconception that I see lots of people make. And that is, although there is a wealth of information about certain roles and professions and careers and industries and sectors on the internet, don't just rely on scouring search engines. Some people think, oh, you know what, I want to be an accountant. Therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go online on a search engine, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to find as many accountant job descriptions as I possibly can, and I'm just going to look for common themes. That is not a good approach. At best, what that will give you is a base level of understanding. So if you feel like you don't have that base level of understanding, of course, go out there, read about what those job descriptions entail, and you might learn a couple of things. But I'm telling you now, reading job descriptions is never going to give you enough information to be able to go out and secure a role that's similar to that job. It's just not. And the reason for that is that job descriptions are problematic. So why are they problematic? There are a couple of things really. So the first one is, you first got to think about who writes job descriptions. So I would say that roughly about 3/4 of all job descriptions aren't written by the people carrying out those roles, but they're written by recruiters like me. So take me as a case in point. If I'm going to write a job description for a recruiter or for someone who works in careers, chances are I'm going to do a pretty good job of it. The reason why I'm going to do a pretty good job of it is because I understand that profession and what it entails. I can make a job description as basic as I like, or as detailed as I like. If I'm going to write a job description for an accountant, chances are that I'm going to err more on the side of a basic job description with some key points in, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to be anywhere near as detailed a job description for an accountant type role as an accountant could write. Who would have thunk it? The second reason why job descriptions can be quite problematic, and it's just something to think about, is if it is a smaller employer, chances are, if they're advertising a graduate role, for instance, there are probably only going to be 1 or 2 graduate roles. And if there are only 1 or 2 graduate roles and 1 job description, then you can be pretty reliant that what's on the job description probably fulfills what the job actually entails. Whereas if you're applying to a larger graduate employer, the chances are you could have 1 job description and hundreds of roles. And if that 1 job description has to be consistent with 100 roles, the chances are that it's not going to be as detailed as it would be for 1 role. And now I've just said the word roles too many times and it's lost all meaning. Roles. And I don't know how I feel about that. Roles. Yeah, I feel okay. So you've been warned, do not just rely on job descriptions. So the 2 approaches that we're going to be working on today are what I like to call employer-led and vocation-led. So the employer-led approach is much better if you have no idea what kind of career you want to go into and you don't really understand what different careers entail. The vocation-led approach is much better if you know exactly what you want to be doing. So you could say, I know for certain that I want to go and train to be an accountant, and you will let that guide the rest of your career search from there on in. So yeah, 2 approaches, one for someone who is completely and utterly starting at square one, and the other for someone who knows what it is they want to do, but they're not quite sure where they want to do it. So to give you an example, I did not have a defined vision of what I wanted to do as a career. I just thought that because I had a parent who was an accountant and I knew lots of accountants, that therefore that was what I had to do. So I guess I took the vocation-led approach, where I said the one thing that I'm absolutely not compromising on is I want to be an accountant. Whereas in reality, and what I've probably learned now, is that because I didn't have a defined vision of what I wanted to be doing, the employer-led approach would have been much better. And we'll start with the employer-led approach. What we mean by the employer-led approach is it is employer first. It is very, very self-explanatory, and I want it to be easy to follow. So if you don't know the first thing about what someone in marketing does, what someone in finance does, what someone in HR does, the best possible thing that you can do in order to crystallize a lot of that information is to think about some employers that you like. And why I'm saying that you should focus on employers if you're not really sure about what particular professions entail is it's very difficult to define what a marketing professional does, for instance, across different sectors. Because knowing how a marketeer works depends on the products or the services of the employer that they work for. It's a lot easier to say, do you know what, actually, I really like Nike. I can understand how someone would go out and market their latest pair of Zooms. Or I like the local estate agents that works around the corner from me. Do you know what? Yeah, it's pretty easy to understand how someone might go and market selling a house. So what I'm going to say to you is the first step is to do exactly what I've just said. List some employers that you like. List large employers, list small employers, list medium-sized employers. I get that it's pretty easy that if you're looking for a training program, logic dictates that you should just go to some of the larger employers. But do not be put off joining a smaller employer. Now, the reason I say that is there are many pros and cons of working for larger employers. There are many pros and cons of working for smaller employers. I cannot possibly enumerate all of those pros and cons in this one video. But the things that I'll say that people forget about smaller employers is that often your training can be better, because if you're one of 50 employees, there is much more impact if they don't get your training right. Whereas if you're one of, 2,000 employees, then it doesn't necessarily matter as much if they don't get your training quite right. There is also the potential to progress a lot quicker, right? If there is a shorter distance from the bottom to the top, then if you are career driven, you could progress quicker potentially. Step 2 is going to be working out what types of professionals work there. What I want you to do is I want you to create a very, very basic, emphasis on the word basic, map of what people do at that company. Often you can use company website. I definitely encourage you to use LinkedIn as well. But say it's an accountancy firm. So what would an accountancy firm have, right? They'll have their fee earners. They might work in audit. They might work in tax. Aside from that, they'll also have what you call their core functions. So people who don't necessarily bring fees into the business, but they provide other services to the business. So they'll need someone to market the services that they offer. They'll need an internal finance team. They'll need someone to sell their services to prospective clients. They'll need a HR team. They'll need IT support. So physically map out what that structure looks like and then try to write a few lines on what your interpretation would be of what each of those people do. I can tell you from experience that the number one thing that employers of graduates and apprentices in particular worry about when they hire their trainees is that they don't have enough commercial awareness. But when you begin this mapping exercise and you begin to think holistically about an employer, how they make money, who works there, what the people who work there do, you're already starting to hone that commercial awareness a little more. So what I want you to do next is, when you have that basic map, is first of all, highlight any grey areas. So anywhere where you literally cannot possibly work out what that person does. You found someone on LinkedIn who works there as a HR advisor, for instance, but you have no idea what that person would be doing day to day. So highlight those grey areas. And then when you have those grey areas, think about how you can provide a little more clarity to them. Is it enough to simply go online and find out what a HR professional does? Again, that's probably going to be good for a base level of understanding, but it's not necessarily going to tell you what they do at the company that you're researching. Or is it better to be bold, to be proactive, and to get in touch with the person doing that role at the company that you're researching? The latter of those two options is always the better one. I get that it can feel scary and you might feel like you don't want to waste that person's time, but trust me, we've all been in your position where we're looking at our first career and we just needed someone to help us. When you've done that mapping exercise for, say, 5 companies, right? 5 companies, and I'd make sure that they are all different sizes, that they're all in different sectors as well, just so you get a breadth of experience. I want you to think about where you fit into that map. Now, not where you ought to fit, but where you think you would fit. Can you see yourself selling a product? Can you see yourself advertising a product? Can you see yourself delivering a product? Once you've been curious enough to go out and find out what these roles entail and you understand them, you'll have a much clearer picture of what it is that you want to do. And the reason the employer-led approach is so important is that if you're going to go and train somewhere and learn, you have to be working somewhere where you feel at home. That is how you're going to get the best out of yourself. Do not go and work for an employer if you don't like them. You want an employer that's going to be able to support your development and not just see you as someone who's there for the short term. So our second approach is the vocation-led approach. Say that I want to go and be an accountant. I know what I want to do. I'm not going to compromise on that. I want to be an accountant. I'm going to go and train to be a chartered accountant. So the first step in the vocation-led approach is going to be to think about which sectors you would like to work in. And what I mean by that is that it's very, very easy to say, I want to be an accountant, therefore I'm going to go and work at an accountancy firm. And that is absolutely fine. Accountancy firms are fantastic places to learn, they're fantastic places to train, they're fantastic places to stay for the rest of your career if that's what you want to do. But also just be aware that there are other places where you can go and train to be a chartered accountant. And research is key to this. If I wanted to go and train to be a chartered accountant, I could go and work for an accountancy firm. I could work for one of the big four. I could work for a mid-tier accountancy firm. I could also go and work for a commercial real estate firm. There are roles in things like real estate finance, working on clients' investment portfolios as well. You can train to be an accountant that way. Or actually, it could be that you say that I want to train to be a chartered accountant, but what I actually don't want, at least for now, is I don't want to be client-facing. So I don't want to go and work at an accountancy firm. I don't want to go and work at a commercial real estate firm. So what you could then think about is actually, I could go and work in an internal finance team somewhere. And one of the things that's actually really common with finance graduate schemes is that there are a hell of a lot of internal finance graduate schemes working for supermarkets, for instance. Then I want you, once you've established what sectors you could go and pursue that vocation in, I want you to have a think about what are the pros and cons of each, right? So what is important to you? If it is important that you're client facing, then go and work in professional services. If the opposite is important, that you definitely don't want to be client facing, then have a think about those internal finance schemes. Once you've worked out what sector you want to do it in, it then becomes very easy to actually go out and start approaching employers. And that is the vocation-led approach. You've probably figured out, right, and I know that I've said it 1,000 times already, but curiosity is really, really important in this. You've got to be curious enough to ask questions. You've got to be proactive enough to engage with employers. And this is a key thing. When you are approaching employers, there are no stupid questions you can ask. Fair enough, if you ask a basic question once you're through to the final stage of a recruitment process, people might bat a few eyelids. But you can nip that in the bud if you ask that question before you've even applied. And employers love people who are proactive enough to actually ask what the role specifically entails and not just go off a job description. And just going back to it, I get that it's human nature to think that employers are going to try and trip you up and they're going to try and trick you, and they basically just want to do everything in their power to get rid of you from a recruitment process. But I can categorically tell you that that is not the case. Employers want you to do well. It is in their best interest for you to do well and for you to understand exactly what you're applying for. So I hope that's helped. It is a bit of a whistle-stop tour to the two approaches, and there is much, much more to it than those basic steps. But you can work out what on earth it is that you want to be doing just by following those simple steps. Please like, subscribe, share with whoever you think this might be useful for. And I'll drop my social media details in the description. So if you have any questions, just get in touch.